ultimately the whole point of the movie is that side taking is has been very problematic, except especially when it comes to the kind of extremist thinking that exists these days around this subject, or even a lot of stuff that's going on in the United States. That was the point of the film, was to introduce the complexity of the problem without trying to reduce it to some kind of one-dimensional answer about what the solution is.
Happy New Year and welcome to the Cup of Tea Critiques podcast. I'm your host, Brandon Chasen, and like always, I'll be joined today by the team that brings you cupofteacritiques.com. Here, we'll dive deep into the productions and topics we wrote on our website so you can decide for yourself if they're your cup of tea. Ready for a deep look with a deep brew? This week, Chris talks with filmmaker Moshe Dahan about his compelling film, Yes, Repeat, No, now available on Prime Video.
I watched Yes, Repeat, No last night, and I was like, "Oh, I really enjoyed it. It was really a great experience. I'm glad I got to watch it. So thank you and Amy for sending that over."
Yeah, no, thanks for watching it so quickly.
Yeah, of course. So I mean, as I was watching it, I was just wondering, what exactly was the catalyst? I think I heard somewhere that you were trying to put a gallery together, and that was where that came from.
I was trying to actually. I was in a PhD program. Part of my work was to curate an exhibition of artists from Palestine and Israel who had all worked on made artworks about intergenerational trauma. Obviously, there's plenty of trauma going around, so there's a lot of work coming out of children of Holocaust survivors, as well as either people who were living through or had lived through or had parents who had lived through the occupation, and being resettled as Palestinians. For the Palestinians, that's the Nakba, right? The catastrophe. So I had some really great artists that were lined up, some of them like museum level artists, and they both had reservations about being in the same gallery with each other, Palestinians and Israelis. And that, that didn't seem like it was going to be that difficult. But of course, Palestinian artists had a real problem kind of being tokenized, as Palestinians who would work with the Israelis, and Israelis also had reservations about it. So the show fell apart. This was like, I think March or April. And I had to fill a gallery. And so the gallery director was like, "I don't care what you do, man. You got to fill this gallery, right? Like, you can't just leave it empty in October." And she said, this was Dr. Julie Carson at the University of California in Irvine, a really incredible gallery with a very rich history of contemporary artwork. And she said, "Okay, well, can you please figure out what to do? You're a filmmaker. Why don't you make a movie?" And I was like, "Okay, well, it was like March or April." She said this, and I was like, "I can't make a movie by October. Like, I don't even know what to make a movie about." And so another person that I was working with was a professor at Berkeley, I think, Stefania Pandolfo, said, "This is kind of a dangerous thing that you're trying to do by putting together Palestinians and artists and like trying to hold this space for both of them at the same time. And there's this guy who did this. His name was Giuliano Mercamiz, and he kind of died for it." And I'd heard the name before because of the Freedom Theater, right? But Giuliano, went into kind of a research hole, and Giuliano is really interesting because his father was a Palestinian Christian, and his mother was an Israeli, a Jewish Israeli, right? So he kind of exists at this fracture as a human being, and I thought, wow, this is really fascinating. Then I saw a video of him on YouTube that actually is in the film, where he talks about, he kind of foreshadows how he was going to die. He's like, and he says it like tongue in cheek. He's not even serious. He's like, "I'll tell you how I'm going to die. Some effed up Palestinian is going to, walk up to me and shoot me in the head. And because of my blonde wife here and my work," because I think his wife is Swedish. And then I saw that it actually happened a few years later, right? And so I immediately was like, okay, there's something really interesting. Now, it's unknown who killed him. It's unknown if they were Palestinian or Israeli. That was never something that was ever kind of concluded. Nobody ever figured that out. There were plenty of people on both sides, Palestinian and Israeli, who had good reason to be suspicious of him. Israelis for what they thought he was doing, which was collaborating with Palestinians through the Freedom Theater, maybe as a front. I mean, I don't even know what it was, but for him, it was cultural intifada. It was like cultural work, cultural activism, teaching, people to work through their trauma in a nonviolent way. But I think also Palestinians and Arabs had problems because they thought, was he working for the Mossad, right? Was he informing on them? And even if that wasn't the case, they really had a problem with him putting teenage boys and girls on stage together and having, boys cross-dress as characters, right? Which is pretty not uncommon in theater, right? So that in itself was kind of radical and offensive. So he was offensive to a number of people in the work that he was doing. And so this to me was really interesting. It was like the fact that he was kind of fractured and existed in this really conflicted way, but would also posed such a danger culturally to people. So that's how I jumped into it,
Yeah, yeah. I thought it was interesting because it's a lot of filmmakers go the route of kind of making a biopic, and instead you have three actors playing three different sides,
Right.
or three different aspects of this character. And the Israeli side is Palestinian side, and his public
Yeah.
side.
And a lot of
Um,
the stuff he says in the film is taken from things he says as a public figure, or in the films where he's playing Israelis, or in the films where he's playing Arabs. I mean, he was an actor before he was an activist. So a lot of it is about the kind of stereotypes that Middle Eastern men face. Actors, especially, like what kind of roles are available to Middle Eastern men in the 1980s, even now, but really
yeah,
back then, it's like jihadi number two, terrorist number four, or Israeli soldier. Like
yeah,
that was it.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Um, I remember hearing you want that you were in a sense aiming for confusion a little bit. You wanted the story to be a little confusing
Yeah.
to the audience. Can you expound on that at all?
Well, I mean, I think the thing that was interesting to me is the way that people construct themselves and their identities is always, we think of it as being so distinct and solid, like I am Israeli or I am this. And what's interesting to me is the way that these identities are kind of constructed moment to moment. You negotiate like who you are. You're different at your job than you are with your friends. You're performing something different slightly. And that's not to say that any of it is inauthentic or untrue. It's to say that like the way that we understand our own identity is pretty fragmented. I would say that I think, you know, it's a very dynamic thing and it's fluid and it changes constantly, regardless of how you identify yourself. Like you're constantly evolving. And for me, that's a much more honest understanding of what identity is. And so Giuliano becomes this kind of allegory for something else. I'm Israeli by birth. I was raised really mostly in the United States from the age of 8. So I don't feel completely Israeli and I don't feel completely American, but I have a very kind of emotional attachment to Israel. It's the place I was born. And so I kind of feel this displacement in the same way or in a different way, let's say, than someone like Giuliano. So I was really interested in the way that, the fact that he had all of these different facets to who he was could in itself become a kind of dramatic situation. So it's really not a biopic. I mean, I'm sure there's a much more accurate story to be told. It's more that Giuliano is a really interesting allegorical figure for the way in which we are all conflicted and conflict exists in the world at large. So getting these actors to kind of compete over which version of Giuliano is the right one seemed a much more interesting way to kind of sneak back into this question of like how to understand this conflict, which I think can be really heavy-handed if you just kind of go right at it, right? So I needed to find a way that was a little more poetic, and that's what splitting him up into 3 dimensions, 3 actors that all want the part, but what the Israeli thinks like, no, he's Israeli. He's got to be Israeli. He's Jewish, like this is who he is. based on all of these parts that he played. But then there's all these parts that he plays as an Arab character. And again, Arab in the film is used kind of in a derogatory way to kind of homogenize an entire population of very distinct ethnicities and nationalities into like this one group. So really, he's Palestinian, and he's constantly trying to remind the director, like, I'm not just Arab, I'm Palestinian. It's not like, it's not that hard. There's a very specific thing to being Palestinian, and it's not Lebanese, and it's not Iranian, right? So it was a way of kind of unpacking the way that identities are always already kind of fractured. And he's such a fascinating figure because he was so charismatic, and he was an actor, right, and an activist and a performer, right, and he is always negotiating that. He can go into Tel Aviv, he can go into Jenin, and always kind of switch codes to belong in each place.
Speaking of the actors, can you talk about the cast you assembled and what that process was like? And did you have any prior relationships with them or?
I didn't. We worked with this incredible casting director named Emily Schweber, and we did a kind of full casting process. And initially, what I wanted was I wanted to find three actors that looked alike. I was looking for three bearded Middle Eastern men that would be easy to confuse in a lineup, right? Like in the kind of stereotyped way of like, oh, you people all look the same because you're bearded and swarthy and dark. And, as we started to identify the best actors, what became really important was that they had some kind of biographical association with this part of the world, that they knew or had experience with it. So the first actor that we cast, I think, was Musa. And Musa is Palestinian, and he had introduced us to Kareem. My producer, Sarah Salovitz, knew Musa from something before that she may have worked on with him. And then Musa introduced us to Kareem, and they had worked together before in Steven Spielberg's Munich. And they played two members of the September of Black September, right? And so they already knew each other, and they had a history. And then Adam came to us just through the casting, like we found, And what was interesting is when we kind of had assembled everybody, we had Kareem, who's Lebanese, Musa, who's Palestinian, Adam, who's Israeli, and Salome Azizi, who plays the director, who's British Iranian, right? So they all have some kind of relationship to this. And then when we did the first table read, we read the script in its entirety 3 times, and I had Musa, Adam, or there was a different actor actually cast in that role first, but that actor, Musa, Adam, Kareem, they read the script 3 times, and they switched parts because I didn't know who was going to be what until after the audition, until after the read through, and we sat down, we discussed it to try to figure out, okay, what's the right feeling. And then what ended up is that the Lebanese actor Kareem ends up being the Israeli, Musa ends up being the Palestinian, and Adam ends up being the kind of public figure who's kind of somewhere in between. So that was really interesting because it's like we kind of kept it loose. We didn't know who was going to be who until we really, probably about a week or two before we started shooting.
I was curious about some of the kind of technical aspects of it. I think you shot, it was mostly in black and white, and then when
Yeah.
it would switch to color, when it was kind of showing them,
Yeah.
outside of the audition itself.
Right.
And so I was curious about that because the black and white made me feel like more tension, and then it would kind of release the tension when it went to color and then kind of
Right.
go back in. So that, and also can you also address like the choice to use an intercom instead of just
Yeah.
speaking
Yeah.
voice to voice?
I mean, some of this was like, sometimes when you start out thinking about something, you're just kind of thinking of the feeling of it. Like what do I want it to feel like? I wanted the director's voice to really feel like, scratchy and far away and separate from them. I thought it would make them feel more isolated. But really, the first conversation about this film that I had was with my sound designer, and it was about the metronome. And I was like, I know there's going to be a clicking beat the whole film. So how do we make that, like, what do we do? We had to, like, he built this metronome that would be in the frame at all times, right? So that was kind of the first choice. And then it was like, okay, well, I also know that it's an isolated space, but because it's this black box space, like we want to activate it, which is then how we kind of came up with the rotating stage, the turntable, because I wanted them to be able to walk and walk and talk and cross and have movements, and also for it to feel really visually dynamic. So we put all of the cameras. We had 4 cameras going on different dolly tracks, so that we could get all of the coverage all the time. Like, so we could be shooting a close up, a medium shot, and a wide shot, and be panning around while we were shooting one take. But the decision to have another camera crew shooting kind of behind the scenes, or color BTS, was also about trying to open up the frame of the story so that it's like they're rehearsing a scene from a film that they sometimes watch images of on a screen. Then we're also, there's this frame of like, then there's the director who's watching them, and then there's me, the director, who's directing them, and then there's the frame of like the viewer at home who's now watching this thing. So there's this like nested sense of like meta cinematic narrative, where it's like a movie about a making of a, is it a filmed rehearsal, or is this like a documentary? Like, is it a documentary about an experimental film, or is it a performance of something that's already been written? And I wanted to intentionally blur all of those lines between performance and whatever you would call reality, because I think that's kind of what identity is, right? You think like, well, what is this person really, and how much of them is a performance and how much of them is real? Well, I don't even think there's a distinction between the two. So the confusion was an intentional thing. And people will come up to me sometimes and be like, I'll be honest with you, like the film kind of confused me. And then my response is always like, all right, good, that's it, you got it, right? That was the intention, was to kind of make you feel unstable with like, well, which character am I looking at? So the black and white was about creating this environment where you thought you knew everybody just because it was so clear. Like, black and white is very kind of crisp and contrasty. It's very easy to identify what you're looking at. But then they're wearing these suits that are black, white, and gray, and then they start to switch the suits. So it's like, again, you're trying to confuse me. Like, who am I looking at? Which bearded Middle Easterner am I actually speaking right now? And then they also switch parts as they're performing. Right. So all of those things were, how much can we kind of make the audience dizzy? How little can we give them to actually hold on to? Because it's like you're kind of holding on for dear life, just to be able to track who is speaking and what position are they speaking from? Do they have authority? Oh, now they're playing the person who doesn't have authority. Right. So it's this constant switching, which I think is frustrating to a lot of people as viewers. That's a thing that we've run against, but that's, to me, that's interesting cinema.
Absolutely. I saw you got your MFA from UC Irvine, and before
Yeah.
that, you were a film executive.
Yeah.
And
That's how I
so,
started.
did anything about being a film executive help you going into filmmaking, or do you draw anything from that, or
For
are they just two
sure.
different worlds?
No, I mean, for sure. I mean, listen, when you're a film executive in the kind of environment that I was a film executive, I was working for companies that had like, big first look deals at Paramount or Sony. You're catering to a very specific kind of audience, right? You have to be there's a very little latitude to be confusing or frustrating, right? You have to hit your quadrants, and you need to understand exactly what your audience is going to achieve. And basically you're telling them what they're supposed to be thinking at every moment of the film, whether it's through music or score or whatever, dialogue. So I feel like that was a really good education in kind of developing scripts with intention. Like, what message do you want being received by your audience, and really learning how to dial that in, working with writers. But that was frustrating to me artistically, because it felt a little too limiting, right? Because there's not as much room, and you can see, every decade as studios consolidate and reorganize, there's less and less room, I think, for things that are on the margin. Let's say movies that are more challenging to audiences. And so that's kind of how I ended up in an MFA program, as I was trying to find my way as an artist, really as a way of understanding like what is the how much room is there to experiment and how much slippage can you really introduce into work. But that doesn't mean that I'm not interested in like mainstream movies, right? So I have this existence that where I kind of shuttle between the two of them. Like I want to make things that people can appreciate, but I also want to challenge them, right? I think academia, which is why I didn't ultimately finish a PhD. I think academia is limited in its appeal and reach to people on a popular level, but really generates some incredible thinking conceptually. So I think my mission is to kind of take these really interesting, challenging ideas and try to bring them as far into a kind of mainstream audience's interest as possible. And there's room for that. I still think, I have a lot further to go into the kind of mainstream side of things. But that's kind of what I'm interested in doing, is taking these ideas that otherwise are so challenging that they just live in academia, right? And bringing them to a bigger audience. And that's kind of what I was trying to do with this film.
I'm curious what the biggest I feel like film shoot like shooting a film can so many things can just pop up and surprise you and be a problem you weren't
Yeah,
anticipating. So I'm
absolutely.
curious what the biggest roadblock you had to navigate around was.
Well, a big part of it, I mean, here's the thing. We shot this film in 10 days, right? 10 pretty much 8-hour days. We maybe had one day of overtime, but we really couldn't afford it. So it's like you're talking about 2 hours in the chair, hair and makeup, wardrobe, and 6 hours on stage. So we're shooting constantly for 6 hours, right? And in order to do that, we had to shoot a lot every day. And we kind of planned it not like a film shoot where it's like, oh, we're going to do these 10 shots today, and we did the one shot, now we're going to do the over the shoulder, we're going to do the reverse, let's reset, let's change the lights, everybody break for 40 minutes, blah blah blah. I wanted to kind of eliminate that because it's really slow. And one of the things that I really like about something like theater is, which is kind of where I started when I was in college and, around that time, is that you're kind of finding the material in the process of rehearsal, and you really don't get to do that when you're making movies. So I wanted to create a situation where we could have the conditions where we felt safe enough to experiment and we could just shoot a lot. So we would shoot like 20-page blocks. And in order to be able to do that, it was important that the actors could have their scripts in their hands, but that was also conceptually aligned with the film, because I wanted them discovering the part as they were rehearsing. So I didn't want them off book when they showed up, right? So we tried to create all these conditions where like we could just play for 6 hours a day. And even like if we had an argument or had to stop and talk about the script, I told the crew, I said, look, if I say cut, that's just for the actors. You keep the cameras rolling. Because there's, on this subject especially, there's a lot to argue about. So it's like, okay, if we're going to argue, I want you to keep arguing. So we tried to eliminate the kind of logistical challenges of like, what's going to go wrong on set today. It was just like, okay, well, whatever happens, wrong or right, is the film. The film is the thing that happens while we're there. But so one of the challenges was kind of creating a safe space where we were all okay doing that. Another challenge that we had was, this material is difficult and people have a lot of strong opinions about it. And, we lost the actor that was originally cast as the Yael, the director, who was brilliantly played by Salome Azizi in the film, quit on us 2 days before, like before we were shooting, because she was an Israeli actress and she had concerns about her career and the consequences to her career in Israel for being in this film. And by the way, they're not wrong. Those concerns were probably not wrong, especially when you consider the kind of stuff that's happened after October 7th, which is, after this film was shot. But she asked us to change stuff in the script. And I said, look, I can't do that. I'm not going to change the script. Like, that's not the nature of this film. You always knew what this was going to be. I'm sorry, we're going to have to replace you. Okay. She agreed. She said, I can't do it. So I had to sit down with Salome literally the night before we were shooting. I was like, okay, it's you, right? So you gotta step in, and she really did, right? And it worked out. So that was a challenge. I had a, we had a musician while we were recording the soundtrack, one of the sound sessions that we did, who called and said, "Look, I don't know if I can continue. I need to know, is this a pro-Palestine movie? Like, is this going to be at a Free Palestine rally?" I think the musician was Israeli. And I said, "Listen, I'm willing to let this show wherever anybody wants to show it so we can talk about it. If you can't handle that, then you can leave. It's okay. I won't hold it against you. Like, but I can't, I'm not going to sit here and tell you this is the side I'm on, or this is the side I'm not on, or I'm pro-Israel, I'm pro-Palestine, because ultimately the whole point of the movie is that side taking has been very problematic, except especially when it comes to the kind of extremist thinking that exists these days around this subject, or even a lot of stuff that's going on in the United States. That was the point of the film, was to introduce the complexity of the problem without trying to reduce it to some kind of one-dimensional answer about what the solution is. And I think that bothered people, and I think that was a challenge also getting into festivals, right? We had challenges getting into festivals for that reason too.
Interesting. Yeah, that's interesting. I was gonna ask you actually, my next question was about the festivals. What was the festival experience like? Because I've asked directors before, what it was like watching people watch what they did, and they said it was kind of nerve-wracking. So I can only imagine you have this added element of it's kind of politically charged.
Yeah, and
So
you
what,
never know.
yeah.
You never know what's going to happen. I mean, the festival thing was interesting. We probably went to maybe a dozen festivals, something like that, and but I think we had to apply to so many to get those dozen. So getting people to see the film was really hard. Once they saw it, they really responded well to it. We won, for the 12 festivals we were at, we probably won 6 or 7 different awards and like 3 or 4, jury or best film prizes, things like that. So getting people to see it was hard, but once they saw it, they were really interested in engaging in the conversation. Like, we got roundly rejected by most Israeli and Jewish film festivals, as well as Arab and Palestinian festivals. So in a way, we kind of we held whatever position we would hold, which was not one side or another, because both sides were offended or something, or both. I don't know if it was because maybe some festivals just don't want to touch that subject because it's so inflammatory, and like people's safety is at risk sometimes when you're talking about a film like this. So. I was always really impressed when we went, regardless of where it was, middle of the country, Omaha, upstate New York, or any place in Europe. Like, people were really open to having the conversation, and were doing it in a way that was really nuanced, in places that you would not expect, right? So I think like reasonable people agree that things are a lot more complicated than they are made out to be in the kind of inflammatory news environment that we live in, right? So I think reasonable people can all agree that October 7th is a horrifying, terrible, unrepresentably bad thing that should never happen. People should never be taken hostage and tortured and murdered. We all agree on that. That's not a hard one to agree on, right? But we can also simultaneously agree that that the displacement and killing of Palestinians is itself really bad, right? Whether you think that's 40,000, 50,000, 60,000, like, we can argue till the cows come home about what the number is, but the fact is that's also bad. And so we can agree on both of those things, and they're contradictory. We can also agree that, Hamas is not serving the Palestinian people, but we can also agree that Netanyahu is not really serving the Israeli people, right? So all of these things can exist at the same time, and most people that are reasonable will agree with all of that, even though it's contradictory, right? And I think that that's the part that we always wanted to maintain, that was problematic for people. But in person, when you met people and you had reasonable people in the audience, most people were like, yeah, it's kind of that fucked. Like, we agree, right? So I think that kind of honesty for us was about maintaining the difficulty of the entirety of this picture, And that doesn't mean that like we don't we recognize that like we have the privilege of saying that we don't want to take a side, but we're still working with Palestinians. So that immediately puts us on a side to some people, right? It puts us on the side of Palestinians because we're working with Palestinians. But but the film tries to kind of take an even-handed uh, view of the problems that are there's enough problems and stupidity on all sides. Like nobody has a monopoly on short-sighted political thinking, right? And that doesn't have to do with Palestine and Israel. That has to do with America. Like there's enough of that crap to go around.
Do you have any future plans to either either for this project or to make more projects around the same subject matter?
It's a hard subject matter. I got to tell you, like this one took me almost a decade, right? Because if you have to realize that I started working on this kind of stuff at the end of my MFA. I mean, I was making work about this when I was still getting my master's, and then I started working on a PhD, and I did that for probably 6 or 7 years. And this movie was kind of the culmination of that. I basically abandoned the PhD to make this film, so I didn't write a dissertation, and so this was really, really personal to me, right? Because again, I'm born in Israel. There's a place in my heart for Israel. It's undeniable. I'm connected emotionally, and so it's like this movie is almost like a love letter. Like I want to have an honest conversation with Israel, and if you know Israelis, they love having honest conversations, right? That are not always easy to have. So, am I ever going to make a movie this personal about this topic? Probably not. But I'll tell you what I am interested in always making is movies that don't kind of have easy outcomes or reduce to kind of easy solutions. Like I think that to me is the influence of fine art in my life is that I'm trying to kind of create the conditions where something interesting but dissonant can happen, right? It's not a clean sound. It's like there's conflicting things going on at the same time that are always fighting, and what you're watching is the fight. That I think I will always do. I mean, the other thing I've thought about since making this film is like I loved shooting this way. I loved having 4 or 5 cameras going at the same time and having the kind of looseness to let things just happen, right? And not have to work in this way that was so rigid where it's like, okay, we got to do this shot and it's this angle and we can only do this angle, and then we have to stop and reset and then take 45 minutes off. Like I would like to find a way to always be working like this. In this case, it worked really well because it's about actors who are auditioning, and so having cameras in the frame made sense. And the question is now, how do you do that again, right, without it becoming kind of a gimmick? So those two things I think I would do. I'm not sure if I would touch something else about Palestine and Israel. It's like it's like a third rail. It's really it took a lot for me just to get this right. I mean, can you imagine how hard it is to say like I'm going to release this film and it's going to represent me in the world when the world it's representing me in is the world that we live in. When it comes to Palestine and Israel, it's like it feels really kind of treacherous. So it'd be really hard to think of something else to say about this. You know,
Yeah, I hear you. Where can people find you if they want to follow your future work or stay in touch?
well, the film itself has its own Instagram account, which is Yes Repeat No Film. My Instagram, for people who care, is Napkin Head. That's just a silly name I came up with when at the beginning of all of the Instagram. And then my website is studiodahan.net, and that is probably launching, March or April of next year. That'll just have, has a bunch of my artwork, and I have a lot of stuff. Some of it is experimental, some of it is like, video installation, sculpture, stuff like that. So it's all kinds of work. This movie is a culmination of all these different things that I've done in the past, right? So I will probably, would love to make another film. That's my goal, and that's kind of what I'm working on, is just trying to figure out what that's going to be, and hopefully not have it take 8 years.
Michael, thank you so much for meeting with me today. This was a great talk, and I've really enjoyed the movie. So,
Thank you.
thank you for sharing.
Thanks so much. I appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, of course.
All right. Talk to you.
All right, take care.
Bye.
That's going to wrap up this edition of the Cup of Tea Critiques podcast. We'd like to thank Michael Moshe Dahan for joining us and discussing his film Yes, Repeat, No. Remember to check it out on Amazon Prime Video. Be sure you rate and follow the Cup of Tea Critiques podcast wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. Also, don't forget to leave a comment and show some love for Michael Moshe Dahan. You can stay in the loop on all things COTC by subscribing on our website at cupofteacritiques.com. You can also find us on Facebook, check out our Instagram at Cup of Tea Critiques, and our letterboxd at COT Critiques. For Reva, Terry, and Chris, I'm Brandon. We'll see you next week for another deep look with a deep brew.